A couple days ago, I did a video talking about 5 cards that had secondary effects that you might have forgotten about, and at the end of that video, I asked you guys to give me suggestions for other cards that maybe I forgot to put on the list, and I took 3 of those suggestions, and then I also came up with 2 others that I sort of remembered as soon as I uploaded that video, and in today's video, we're going to talk about 5 more cards with secondary effects that you forgot about. However, I am making a small change to the title. No one really cares. I'm not going to call this their secondary effects anymore. I was thinking about that other video, and it's not really fair to call it secondary effects because many of those cards had like 3 or 4 effects, and it's just one effect that we're kind of forgetting about. So this video is just going to be called effects that you forgot about. Not that anyone really cares about that. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about Honest in this video. I just want to get that out of the way. It's sort of like an honorable mention. A lot of people said that they forgot that Honest could bounce back to the hand. I don't know if I've just been playing this game too long, but that is like one of the most integral parts of Honest's effect, or at least it has been for like the first 3 years that it was released, if not longer. Just because one of the better plays with Honest was, there's 2 main plays I'm thinking about. One is when you open Honest and not a good light monster, you could set the Honest, your opponent would attack into it. They probably couldn't attack over it, at least back in the day, because it had 1900 defense, and then it bounces back to your hand, so then you can summon a light monster and get the bonus effect. So that was really cool, but also a lot of times when both you and your opponent have no cards, like you're both down a top decking, Honest is really good because you can normal summon it, attack for 1100, and then bounce it back to your hand. It sort of put your opponent on an 8-turn clock, which is pretty good when both of you are down to like no cards. It's pretty cool because then when you eventually draw a light monster, you can summon the light monster and the Honest is now in your hand, but it's done a ton of incremental damage, which can make a huge difference, especially if you're going into time. Anyway though, Honest aside, I first want to talk about Fluffle Bear. Now most people know that you can discard Fluffle Bear to set a toy vendor from your deck to the field. That's pretty much the effect that it's most well known for, and it is usually the effect you want to use. But did you know that Fluffle Bear has another effect that's kind of weird? It lets you tribute itself while it's on the field to add a polymerization from your graveyard to your hand. Will that ever be used? Not really. Sometimes it comes up. You know, I've played hundreds of games with Fluffles, and I'd say that probably like 5 times I've used this effect. It only really comes up when you get down to very low cards. It's easy to have a lot of monsters, but it sometimes can be easy also to run through your polymerizations really fast or your Fight for Fusions really fast. So by using that Fight for Bear or Fluffle Bear recovery effect, you can add a polymerization back to your hand and then hopefully get another fusion summon to close out a game. The reason that doesn't come up is because the toy vendor effect is super crucial for getting Fluffles sort of going. That's like the main engine card that they want on the field all the time. So there aren't a lot of situations where you're actually using the on-field effect of Fluffle Bear. Pretty much the only situation is if you've already used all of your toy vendors, and the game usually doesn't last that long in Fluffles just because it's sort of an OTK deck. It's not really like a controlling deck. However, it is worth noting that that does have that effect just in case you are playing Fluffles, because it is pretty handy when you're down to a bunch of monsters and no way to actually fusion summon something. Then you can use Fluffle Bear to get that polymerization back to your hand and get your engine going again. Next up on the list is the card that I talk about in a lot of top 5 videos. It's good for a lot of reasons, and that is Elemental Hero Stratos. So everyone kind of knows about Stratos at this point, but you might not know that Stratos does have a heavy storm-like effect. So the reason that this doesn't come up very often, well, there's really 2 reasons. First off, it doesn't count itself for the heavy storm effect. It blows up cards up to the number of other elemental hero cards or other hero cards you have on the field. And so that doesn't really count itself, and Elemental Hero Stratos is usually a starter card, which means that the second reason Stratos usually doesn't work is because it's like the first card you're playing. You're usually not summoning Stratos after you've built the board, you're summoning Stratos to build a board, although I guess in general at this point, you're not summoning Stratos at all because it's completely banned. But even when this card was legal, that effect usually did not go off. You were usually just using Stratos to search a card. However, the Heavy Storm effect is pretty neat, and it did come up every once in a while. It is kind of cool. It's non-targeting disruption or non-targeting destruction for back row, which is kind of neat. That sort of effect wasn't really around back then outside of the actual Heavy Storm. However, it's just really not what you're playing Stratos for, and the times that it comes up are so few and far between that most people didn't even know it had that effect. effect. Now, if we move on to the next one at number 3, we have Scrap Dragon. Now, this was one that a lot of people suggested. I've played a lot of Scraps in my day, so maybe I wasn't really thinking of this, but did you know that Scrap Dragon also has an effect that's when it's destroyed by battle or a card effect, you get to special summon a Scrap non-synchro monster from your graveyard? It's pretty good. It's actually really, really good in Scrap decks. You can bring cards back like Scrap Golem or Scrap Chimera or Scrap Beast, any sort of non-synchro Scrap monster, and it does have to have that effect just because it would be too good if it could bring itself back just from a generic synchro standpoint. Maybe nowadays it'd be fine to have that, but back when this card came out, that probably would have been way too unfair. But yeah, you can bring back a whole slew of Scrap monsters that you play. Not a lot of people play Scraps anymore though, so I think people just kind of forgot about that. But if you do happen to play Scraps, you definitely want to know about that revival effect. Sadly, it does not trigger off its own effect. You can't Scrap Dragon and Scrap Dragon to pop itself in the special guide. That's not what it can do. It has to be either by battle or your opponent's card effect. And but I mean, that would be cool too as well. But yeah, if you ever play Scraps, probably want to know that effect. Now, moving on, we have probably one of the most requested ones in terms of sheer number of comments on that last video, and this one I think is one that I knew about this effect, but that I just forgot the card existed when I was making that list, and that is Black Rose Dragon. So Black Rose Dragon has this really great sort of blow up the whole field effect, and that's what people usually do with it. And if they don't do that, I mean, that means that they're like in such a winning board position that they just want a 2400 attack monster. However, Black Rose Dragon has it's not a graveyard effect, but it has a banishing effect that lets you banish a plant monster to switch a defense position monster your opponent controls to attack position and then reduce its attack to 0 until the end of this turn. So that is such... I mean, when is that ever going to happen? When is it ever better to kill one monster by banishing a plant monster? I mean, first of all, you have to be playing plants and have them in the grave when you summon the Black Rose Dragon. When is that ever going to be better than just blowing up the field? The only scenario where that's actually good, and there's not a ton of them just because people really don't play a lot of defense position monsters anymore. Even when this card first came out, that wasn't really a thing. But the only time that's ever really relevant is when you want to just do 2400 damage to your opponent. Maybe they're at like 2000 life points or something, and you're pretty sure they don't have any relevant back row. So if they have a field full of monsters, they sort of turtled up its like time or whatever, and they just have a bunch of defense position monsters, well, in that case, yeah, you can summon Black Rose Dragon, switch it to attack. But even in many scenarios where you could have done that, it's better to just blow up the field and then summon something else. So the only time this card's ever played is pretty much the only time that like a card like Magic Cylinder would be good, and that's when it is doing the last amount of damage to win the game. But in general, people don't do that effect too often, and I can't really blame them. Not a lot of people play plants, and plants that they do play, they probably don't even want to banish. I mean, you're not going to banish like a spore for this effect. You want the spore in the grave, or like a glow up bulb or something. But it comes up every once in a while. So if you're playing plants, playing Black Rose Dragon, you might want to know that just in case. And now I guess Scapegoat is a lot more popular. I mean, most of the time your opponent's using that in your end phase, but if they're using it to block attacks, you can sort of, I guess, I don't even know that, because I guess they would usually use it in the battle phase. So I guess if you Twin Twistered a Scapegoat and they activated it, and you could somehow summon a Black Rose Dragon with a plant engrave, in that very specific scenario, you could do 2400 damage, and sometimes you'll win a game off of that, but usually you should just blow up the field. The number one spot on this list is going to a card for many reasons. First off, this is the only card on the list where I actually completely forgot about its extra effect, not the fact that the card existed. For all the other cards on this list, I knew that they had those second effects, and if someone handed to me, I would have been able to tell you what they were. I just kind of wasn't thinking of the cards when I made that original list. But in this card's case, I not only forgot the card sort of existed, I forgot that it had not only one effect that people forget about, but two effects that people forget about, which means that it has to be number one, and that is number 38, Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy. So everyone knows that this card can negate a spell. That is like the go-to effect of this thing, but it actually has two other effects that not a lot of people remember. So the one that people sort of remember is that when a monster is attacked, you can detach a guy to direct the attack to this thing, and people don't remember that one, but it is the most memorable out of the two that people forget about. I think it's the one that people remember remember, just because you have to, this is the only effect that lets you detach the material from this thing. Otherwise, you're just gaining materials, which is kind of interesting. So there's that effect, but also there's this sort of bonus effect. So if a face-up Exceed monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one face-up Exceed monster you control. It gains attack equal to one of those destroyed monsters' original attack. So this did come up back when this card was played in Draco Pals, because you would have this and a Majesty's Maiden or like a Giant Hand or something. Your opponent would not be able to kill this thing, and they would kill your other guy, and then you could give this guy that monster's attack. However, most people don't know that effect exists, and I can't blame them, because just in general, there aren't a lot of decks that are not only summoning a number 38, but also summoning another Exceed monster next to it. It's also kind of weird because this card has the Lightning Rod effect, and if you're using that effect, well then an Exceed monster isn't going to be destroyed while it's on the field. So it's like this very specific situation where your opponent has like a lot of monsters. So maybe you have Hope Harbinger, you have a smaller Exceed monster, you let them kill the smaller Exceed monster to give this guy attack, and now your opponent really can't attack you because you just redirect the attack to this thing when it's at like 5,400 or something ridiculous like that. But overall, most people just summon this thing to negate spells. They're not really thinking about these other two effects, which I think is really interesting, because so far I have not been able to find a card where we couldn't remember two effects on it. Most of them just have one effect that people have sort of forgotten about, but this one had two, and I was really surprised by it, so I had to put it at number one, and I think a lot of people will agree with me. It was like not the most commented one, I think Black Rose was, but in terms of like a lot of people commenting it, and then a bunch of people replying to those comments saying, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that, and as well as people saying like, I won games off people forgetting this effect existed, this card just took the number one spot for all those criteria. But anyway, that is going to wrap up this list. I don't know, and I probably don't think that I'll do another one of these videos. I think we've covered sort of 10 really solid cards that have these extra effects that we've forgotten about, but you can still comment ones that I didn't put on either of these two lists. I'll sort of at the end of the video link that other video if you haven't seen that, but I will see you guys later. Goodbye.